Hey everyone, welcome back. It's good to have you here. Are you looking to reboot your thinking about farming, ranching, food systems, and the people that operate them? You've come to the right place. This is the Ranching Reboot Podcast, and I'm your host, Red Hills Rancher. Get ready for episode 165. This season of Ranching Reboot is sponsored by Land Trust, the Recreation Access Network. If you've heard me talk about all the different outdoor recreation opportunities available on Land Trust, you've heard me talk about all the different things you can find to do on Land Trust, from hunting just about any species you can think of in North America, to camping, hiking, birding, biking, and stargazing. Land Trust has something for you. Now, with Land Trust Plus, you can be one of the first to know about new properties, get property updates from landowners, and book next season with confidence and get great deals on some of the best brands in the business. Let me break it down for you. With Land Trust Plus, you'll get first dibs on any new listings to book the hunt of your dreams before it's sold out. Land Trust Plus also gives you draw protection, so you can plan your hunts and book your trips before the draw. Bad luck? Didn't draw this year? With Land Trust Plus, you don't have to worry. With draw protection, you'll get a refund if you don't draw tags. Book your dream hunt today with Land Trust, the Recreation Access Network. Get started today at www.landtrust.com/reboot or by clicking the link in the show notes. Today, we're exploring the fascinating realm of regenerative agriculture, soil health, and sustainable farming practice. Join us as Dale Strickler, a seasoned expert, shares his profound insights on the challenges and opportunities shaping today's agricultural landscape. In this engaging interview, Dale and I delve into the roots of agriculture, its ancient origins to its modern-day repercussions. Together, we're going to examine how history, policy, and economics intricately intertwine with farming, molding the very fabric of our food system. We'll discover the impact of crop subsidies on farming practices, the crucial role of land management in environmental conservation, and the transformative potential of innovative farming techniques that'll heal our planet. Let's go. Hey, buddy. How you doing today?
I'm doing great.
It looks like you're hiding in a hotel room. Where are you at?
I am in Cameron, Missouri right now. So,
What the hell is in Cameron, Missouri?
well, right now, rain, which I'm sure I'm making you incredibly jealous. That statement.
Don't tell me that, because I think we're just like sliding right back into D3. I think we had a good summer last year and a decent fall, but since then it's just kind of all gone to shit. We did get a little shower this morning. I'm not even sure it was enough to wake up the rain gauge, but
Yeah, I feel for you, man. I've been there.
you know, it just seems like it sneaks up on us. It's like we just turn around one day. It's like, oh, it's been 180 days since we've had a half inch of rain. Maybe we're back in drought. And I don't know. It just seems like I'm always surprised that, oh crap, it's dry again. It's like, hey, dummy, we live in the plains. It's going to be like this 7 out of 10.
Yeah, and you ask yourself, are we in a drought, or is this the new normal? That's a big share.
I'm inclined to say that drier, warmer is moving towards the new normal. I mean, you've known my dad for like a century and a half.
Uh-huh.
And he's been saying for probably 20 years, manage like you're 100 miles southwest of here, which,
Mhm.
okay. And I get it doesn't work for everybody to think like they're managing 100 to 150 miles southwest of where they're at. But in the plains, if you're in the middle
Yeah.
of Kansas, you better start managing like you're, in eastern New Mexico, northeast New Mexico, because that's what the weather's going to be. It's going to be hotter and drier, I think.
So I listened to a climatologist 2-3 years ago, and probably one of the most spot on climate talks I've heard. He's talking about the changes that had occurred in Kansas climate over the past 40 years. Eastern Kansas actually getting wetter. Well, let me back up. Western Kansas getting drier, about 2 inches annual precip a year drier.
Okay.
That's no surprise.
That
That's
tracks.
kind of what we've seen. Layered Eastern Kansas is actually getting a little wetter, about 2 inches a year. It's like Eastern Kansas, took that moisture from Western Kansas. It seems like it's moving to the east. But layered on top of that, in both parts of the state, east and west, there's a couple other changes that I think are really impactful. You say, well, Eastern Kansas is getting more rain, so they're better off. And that's actually not the case, because coupled with that, the winters are getting much warmer.
Okay.
Summers are about the same, but winters, when I was a kid, Brian, it snowed. We'd cancel snow because we'd have 3-foot drifts of snow in the wintertime.
Yeah.
They still cancel snow or school for snow, but it's when we get, 3 inches of snow, they'll cancel school. When I was a kid, we had a lot of snow cover. We'd get winter moisture, and every spring we'd be sitting on our hands because we couldn't plant corn. It was too muddy. That was with 2 inches less annual moisture per year. Because now the winter evapotranspiration is greater. We're going into every spring dry now, it seems like. We have no soil moisture. We're living hand to mouth all summer. We no longer get those gentle, frequent spring rains like we used to. Now, summer rains have always been rather infrequent, but we get thunderstorms, convective moisture events, and which tend to be very intense and infrequent. That's become our, it used to be we'd get gentle rain in spring and fall.
Right.
And then we get thunderstorms in the summer. Now it seems like the only form of precipitation we receive is thunderstorms, which are infrequent and intense. And I think
scattered and isolated.
Yes. And hit and miss, in this past weekend, Eastern Kansas got, 10 to 15 inches of rain. The rest of the state, nothing, or, 0.3. And
maybe it was 3 inches in between drops here.
Yeah. And so whether you believe in climate change or not, there's universal agreement that our rainfall, even if the annual average has not changed that much, it doesn't go as far as it used to. And it's becoming less frequent and more intense when it does rain. We have our rainfall we have long droughts punctuated by occasional floods.
Yep. And that fits the pattern. That fits the pattern that, has started to develop. I was just thinking of something. I was just going to say it. I slipped my mind, but we're kind of living paycheck to paycheck on rain. And, I guess we could just jump in to the bottom of the rabbit hole and start there and maybe trying to claw our way out. So what I'm really wondering is how much of an effect it's had on the water cycle in the Southwest when we divert all the Colorado River water for irrigation. And we don't need to talk about whether, it makes sense to pump water over 2 mountain ranges to grow strawberries in the Central Valley of California or not, whether it makes sense to grow alfalfa for dairy cows in Saudi Arabia in Arizona. We don't need to talk about whether or not that makes sense. let's just talk about like the missing 12 to 15 million acre feet of water that should be going into, I think it's the Sea of Cortez between Baja, Mexico, or Baja, California, and mainland Mexico, where the Colorado River estuary, where it should be going to the ocean. So I think about the Nile River. Okay, the Nile River Delta. It's one of the most fertile regions in the world.
Mhm.
A lot of water goes through there. A lot of people live there. They grow a lot of crops right there on the river delta. Mekong River Delta in Vietnam, same kind of thing. You know, we kind of look at back through ancient history, and you and I kind of like our history and studying history. Um, River estuaries, river deltas. That's where people. That's where a lot of settlements have been throughout history. So take the second biggest, second, third, I don't know. Snake River's bigger, the Mississippi's bigger, whatever. One of the largest rivers in North America. We take all of the water out of it for agricultural purposes. And I I have a hard time thinking that we're making an effective use of water pumping it over 2 mountain ranges to grow fucking strawberries. Like, that's just like, I can't get there. Like, I can't get how it makes sense to grow alfalfa in Arizona and ship it to Saudi Arabia. Like, the only way that makes sense is if we have no value at all on our water. There's no value on our water. So what I'm thinking of here is, okay, so we dam up the Colorado River. That's 12 to 15 million acre feet of water that aren't in that river delta anymore, that are not going to the ocean anymore. What effect on our weather pattern does removing all that water have? We took that river delta, which should have been green, that estuary, which should have been green and moist and held a lot of water and a lot of humidity, and we dried that up. Is damming up the Colorado River and diverting all that water, is that contributing to desertifying in Arizona and New Mexico? Because we took all that water out, we removed that humidity from the system, we removed that, those fertile those green growing plants that held all the moisture in that river delta. Now that's all dust. It's bare soil and it's dust. Dust particles in the atmosphere prevent moisture nucleation, prevent cloud formation. So more dust in the air coming from the southwest on the trade winds that blow in the upper atmosphere from that area to here are bringing in more dust. So that's keeping clouds from forming. So I don't know. Does that make any sense to you?
Yes. Although I think if you're going to point a finger, well, first of all, land use absolutely has an impact on rainfall, the climate in general. I think we have done society a huge disservice because of the intense focus on fossil fuel use in climate change.
Okay.
And I'm not going to say that it doesn't have an impact, but I honestly think that a far bigger impact on our climate is our land use, our messing around with the water cycle, the tillage of the soil, which oxidizes soil organic matter, and it goes up into the air. If it's so simple to look at, Brian, and I think irrigation in the Southwest is relatively minor. What I think is much bigger is we had all these lush grasslands that were grazed out of existence, and now we're just, scattered creosote fields. We have stuff that was grasslands that were plowed and now are in fallow wheat all over the Southwest United States, where they grow nothing for 11, 12, 14 months at a time, 18 months at a time. There's nothing growing out there. There's no transpiration. If you want for rain to form, three things need to happen. You need to have moisture in the atmosphere. You need to have a cooling event. And you need to have condensation nuclei, particles that are hygroscopic enough to attract moisture to themselves, enough moisture to make them heavy enough to fall. And you hit on some of those things. So if you look at those three factors, how does our land use impact that? So moisture in the air. There's two sources of moisture in the air. One is large bodies of water, basically the ocean. And so coastal areas, because of their proximity to the ocean, tend to receive more rainfall. Large bodies of water evaporate a lot of moisture, and that tends to move inland with wind. The other source is from land, evapotranspiration. Evaporation, if you look at a bare field after it rains, you get a heavy rain, that field will evaporate rapidly, the moisture in that topsoil. And so you get a 3-inch rain. Evaporation contributes to rainfall that occurs the next day and the next day. We don't need 3-inch rains on consecutive days. We need 1-inch rains once a week for the next 6 weeks. Correct? When you have large areas of bare soil on inland, now I'm just going to ignore the ocean contribution to moisture in the air, because that's pretty static. And that's probably beyond our control. But what happens on the land? You get bare soil, and evaporation is your main source of moisture. You get heavy rains on consecutive days. On the other hand, if you have green growing grass or green growing vegetation, cover crops, forest, you get that rainfall goes in the soil better. You get better infiltration. And then it comes out slowly over the course of several months as transpiration. And if you want to see that transpiration demonstrated, take a clear plastic bag, go out to a tree, tie it on there first thing in the morning, and then in the evening, go out and look at it. And that bag will be full of water. Transpiration contributes a lot of invisible moisture, slow and steady, just like we'd like our rain, slow and steady. So when we replace perennial vegetation, or even, constantly growing grain crops or cover crops with fallow, fallow has been an institution in the Southwest, really the Western Plains as a whole, for roughly a century. And we can discuss fallow and the wisdom of fallow, but there is no doubt that when you replace all that constant green with bare soil, that tends to convert a rainfall to more intense. And then you look at temperature. We have to have a cooling event. Bare soil, take a heat gun, measure that bare soil. On a summer day, it's 140, 150 degrees. Green growing grass right next to it will be 80 degrees. There might be 60, 70 degree difference between perennial vegetation and fallowed, bare, tilled cropland. Now, there's 4.5 billion acres of cropland around the world. Okay. Most of it tilled. How much impact does it have on global temperature when you've got 40, 50, 60, 80 degree difference on 4.5 billion acres of land around?
It's a good question. And I think it's a small effect. Like the scientists that would want to defend it might say something like, "Oh, it only contributes maybe 1 or 1.5% to global temperature or whatever." And I'd turn around and say, "What would you pay for a 1.5% efficiency in your factory? What would you pay to go from 98 to 99.5% efficiency? What's that worth?" I would also say, let's take a car and let's make one system 1.5% less efficient. Let's get a 1.5% of the spark energy away or something. I'm reaching, but I'll get to a point. When a system is as complex as weather,
Mhm.
planetary weather system, we have no idea how it works. And for a scientist, a climate scientist or a planetary scientist to say, "Oh, well, that 1% of extra bare soil, that has no effect on the overall balance of the climate." It's kinda like saying, "Well, we're only taking 1% of the wind energy in the area with these wind farms, and that can't have any effect on the weather." Like, really? Really? You show me another complex system where you can adjust a variable by 1% and it doesn't adjust the output. I don't buy it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would agree it probably has a small impact on global temperature, but I would also argue that it has a big impact on regional temperature. If you don't believe that, go hold that stop sign on black asphalt all day long in the summertime, on the road crew and feel the heat come. I mean, you stand downwind from an asphalt road in the middle of the summer, you can feel the heat off of it. And then multiply that by millions of acres and fallow across the Southwest.
When my friends ask me to come drive tractor, like, "Oh,
Mhm.
I'll do it. I'll do it. No problem. Doesn't matter the task. If a friend of mine needs help, we'll go help." I can remember a lot of days stepping out of that tractor middle of the afternoon in the middle of the field and just feeling the heat and the sun baking off of that soil. Freshly turned earth, smell it behind you, one of the best smells on earth, but just the heat just baking back up and
So,
radiating and cooking everything out of you and cooking all of the moisture out of the world.
so when you heat an air mass, what does it do, Brian?
Expand.
It expands. So when you have a large area of bare tilled soil in the summer, especially fallow wheat areas, high percentage of the land is bare tilled fallow, and people are tilling more and more because of herbicide resistant weeds that they can't cheaply kill anymore with herbicide. And you have this big expanding air mass over that area. You create a heat dome. That heat dome, not only does it prevent cooling of moist air masses that might come in from the ocean or come from vegetated areas through transpiration, but it moves those moist air masses will move around that area instead of coming through, because of that expansion of the air drives those moist air masses and also drives cold fronts away. You get frequent gentle rain when a warm, moist air mass from the ocean meets a cold front. When you have those heat domes, it basically keeps those two separate and drives them around. And so I think that is one of the causes of our lack of frequent gentle rain. And that's the amount of bare tilled soil creating these heat domes.
I can agree with that. I could agree with that. I'm sitting here wondering why nobody talks about this. Is it because people have just such a narrow focus, like generally in their education and their training? Like They're not.
I think so. When was the last time you listened to any weather forecast and someone mentioned anything about land use or anything about the condensation nuclei that are in the clouds? You mentioned that dust particles, basically dust particles are silicon dioxide. I mean, they can be organic, airborne organic matter, but that's a tiny fraction. Usually it's silt particles or clay particles, which are silicates. Their bulk density is about 94 pounds per, square foot. It's, and I apologize for not using metric units. But
Nobody will call you out on it. I can promise that.
Okay. So, basically it's the same bulk density as cement. Portland cement has the same bulk density as, because, fine, tiny particles of essentially same stuff clay is made out of. And that's what's in the atmosphere. And if it's going to get airborne, it has to be really, really tiny because it's very, very dense. So it doesn't have a very big diameter. So each individual particle has very little surface area to attract moisture. So airborne dust tends to reduce precipitation. And that's been documented in research in Australia, in China, all around the world.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So if you and I can sit here and figure this out in less than 25 minutes, there's one of those notifications. We figured this out in less than 25 minutes. Where's everybody else?
This is an expanding. If you do a Google search for biogenic aerosols, which are that, if I say that dust is ineffective at triggering rainfall, takes massive amounts of moisture in the air to trigger rainfall when dust is the primary condensation nuclei. You say, well, what are the condensation nuclei that are effective? And they are what are called biogenic aerosols. And if you do a Google search for biogenic aerosols, you'll find prior to 10 years ago, there was maybe a couple thousand published articles on biogenic aerosols. If you do it now, there'll be 10 times what there was 10 years ago. It's becoming, and really within the last 5 years, this is becoming a major focus. And biogenic aerosols are things like pollen grains, fungal spores, leaf inhabiting bacteria, the volatile organic carbons from aromatic trees like pine trees.
Okay.
Have the smell of pine trees is there's an aromatic ring structure. The compound's called pinene. Go figure. But it's essentially a benzene ring that smells like pine, hence the name pinene. And those are the main triggers of rainfall. Those are the main condensation nuclei that trigger frequent, gentle rain like we want it. And when you take out, now there's a lot of talk about pollinators. Let's put in pollinator strips.
Yeah.
Well, those are flowers that attract bees and butterflies. They go to the pollen. So how is that pollen spread? By bees and butterflies. That is not the kind of pollen that triggers rainfall.
You're talking about
what triggers rainfall is we want airborne pollen. like from grasses. We want wind pollinated plants. Ragweed, like it or not, it donates a lot of airborne pollen. And those pollens are, some pollens stay close to the ground. Others are able to go airborne and travel, some cases hundreds of miles in the upper atmosphere, and are very effective at triggering rainfall.
We got to pause real quick because I drank too much coffee this morning.
Okay.
I'll be right back. All right. Sorry about that. So seems pretty simple. Less dust, more pollen. Then that means less bare ground, more plants. I just have a lot of trouble. I mean, it's easy to think about. It's easy to do as a thought experiment. It's like, okay, what would the Colorado, what do we think it would look like if the Colorado River ran free to the ocean again? And how would that start to affect everything east of there and north of there? Where the trade winds kind of come off the equator. How would that affect us? And, the trade winds come right over that part of the world, right over you and I. They've got to be bringing, whatever's in the atmosphere down there. So if we get, the moist winds coming off the Pacific Ocean, coming over those mountains, they drop down. And as soon as they drop down, they start hitting dust. All that moisture just disappears. Have you heard me talk about beavers? How many beavers? There used to be 600 million beavers in North America. And none of the accounts I've really read from the guys that, the mountain men are from, like, back east, St. Louis, along the Mississippi, Missouri rivers, when they'd go to the mountains to trap, they didn't keep detailed journals. They didn't keep a travel log and say, hey, I've been in the plains for the last 37 days headed for the mountains and I've trapped 153 beaver here. No, they're not going to write that. They're not going to write down what creek it was because no map, nothing had names. They were just trying to catch beaver and make money. They didn't care about documenting. So the plains, I can see a lot of evidence of where the historical beaver ponds were on my ranch, like the creeks. As a matter of fact, I ran across a picture today from, it was a post I made 10 years ago on Facebook when I first noticed the beavers had come back onto Stewart's Creek, which is a creek just east of my dad's house. So they've been there 10 years now. And the amount of water that they've stopped up and how high they had the dams and how many dams they have is just unbelievable. I wish you could come down here sometime and I could take you down there and I could show you and maybe show you some old pictures and videos.
I'd like to do that.
It's just really incredible how much water they have stopped, and not just how much water, but like every year they'll add 6 inches to every dam. Okay. That's putting that much more water up underneath the hills. So the bottom that this creek is in, there's a big part of it where it's totally full of water. And now we're on, like, I can see where the different bench layers are, from like where the normal creek channel is. And you've got like an intermediate flood layer, then a higher flood layer. And they've got where they're working, they've got that intermediate flood channel. They've got it completely dammed up. So what I'm saying is, like, a lot of these creeks and rivers could have been a whole bunch wider because there were beaver dams and all that water getting stored up. And this kind of leads back into a conversation Tanya and I were having the other day. She said, what percentage of fresh water is in the clouds? Well, I don't know.
I should know this, but I apologize.
And I'm not going to give you any demerits for not knowing. But the question is the balance of atmospheric moisture any different than it was 100 years ago? Like, is there overall less moisture in, say, over a 3-month period or a 1-year period now than there was 100 years ago? I would
say in the clouds, probably minor change, but not big.
Then again, what's a minor change? You tell me a system that a 1% change will not eventually affect. So what's a minor change?
Only,
Now, looking back to, say 16, 1700 before the beaver trapping really started in earnest, what was the percentage of water that was trapped in surface water behind beaver dams?
oh, probably phenomenal.
I mean,
And you don't have to look very long on YouTube before you see. I mean, there's all kinds of videos. We reintroduced beavers to this Western ranch, and here's a photo before, and it shows, this arid landscape with just this little ribbon of green going through the center. And then they bring back the beavers, and all of a sudden the entire valley floor is green, because that water, once you stop its progression towards the ocean as rapidly as possible and replace that with beaver dams holding that water, allowing it to spread laterally, basically all that riparian vegetation just begins to flourish. And a lot of Western rangelands, the only green for most of the year is along the riparian areas. And you expand that riparian area from 10 feet wide to 300 feet wide. What have you done? You've vastly, vastly increased the productivity of that rangeland. And what have you done to the local hydrology? It's really a win-win for everybody involved when you restore that natural system. Now think about this, Brian. I mean, we know what beaver do. And yay, beavers. If you say, well, what if we were to do, instead of waiting on the beaver, what if we humans were to go and do that? We're going to stop up all of our put little leaky dams in all of our dry streams. And I've seen, I mean, you look up the term leaky weir.
Yep.
And in Australia, I mean, it's been a phenomenally effective device for one rock dams, slow that water flow, retain it on your landscape longer. If you were to do that in Kansas, block up these streams, what happens?
Farmers
you get a
get
visit
mad
from a government agency, including, possibly, law enforcement, because the old saying that, whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting over. If all the battles over water, they made it illegal to impede the downstream flow of water. You got to go get permits for that from the government. And so you can't impound water as a human being. Beavers can do it, but we can't legally do it in the state of Kansas. And if you think about the net effect of that, what we do is that and the idea is that you can't rob water from your downstream neighbor. But the result of that is that we donate a lot of water to our downstream neighbor in a flood, and we contribute none in a drought.
Okay. Like, I see the purpose of that rule. That's so if there's a river running across my property, I can't build 100-foot dam across the creek and keep all that water for myself and not let you have any downstream. That's the extreme case. Okay. But that's generally why laws are written, is because somebody had a really extreme
Because of the
case.
extreme.
Okay. I get that. Now, uh, when beavers build dams, it's a little different, right? They're not going to go build a 20 or 50-foot high structure to stop a creek.
Mhm.
I think 6 or 8 feet is kind of about the limit for a beaver dam.
Mhm.
Somebody proved me wrong. Fine. Most beaver dams are 6 inches to 2 feet. They're just little checks and balances just to slow it
And they're
down and
porous.
spread it out. And they're very porous,
They leak.
and they're supposed to. We don't wanna build something that leaks. We won't build anything that leaks. I mean, okay, if it needs to have a flow rate through it, we're gonna build a structure that's completely leak proof, and we're gonna put a straw in it with a valve so we can precisely control that flow rate because we wanna control how much it leaks, because we know how much it should leak.
Mhm.
Uh, yeah. And, that I was also thinking, like, okay, well, maybe one of the arguments is, well, instead of just building 1,000 dams that are a foot high up this creek, we're just gonna go downstream and build one that's 1,000 feet high. Same
I
thing, right?
we have this, I don't know if it's human nature or being American, bigger is better. And I would argue that bigger is worse. People, I mean, it's like, hey, I expanded my farm from 1,000 acres to 10,000 acres. We're talking earlier, well, you only do that by taking out your 9 neighbors that each had 1,000 acres.
Right.
Is that progress? One person can now farm, 5 times the acres that we could when I was a kid.
Yay, we're
Is that
productive.
progress? Yeah, is that the best way to, I go down the road and I see the sign said one farmer feeds 155 people plus.
Hold up.
We,
I lost you there for a second. Like, start back over with, "I'm going up the road."
yeah. So when I go up the road and I see those billboards, one farmer feeds 155 people plus you. That's how we measure productivity. It's like, well, okay, what did that farmer produce? How many pounds of number 2 yellow dent corn that didn't feed people?
Yeah,
You know,
I have the same thoughts about those signs, like,
how
you
much
show me
food
you show me the
we spray.
farmer in Kansas that's got a vegetable garden that feeds 155 people. Nobody has one. Everybody's growing wheat, corn, cotton, and beans. Yeah, people
Yeah.
eat, but we don't eat corn, we don't eat cotton, and we don't eat soybeans.
Yeah. We should not eat soybeans. But, uh, there's, I mean, those are primarily animal food. And, um, but not only are we not producing direct human consumption food, and I'm not, obviously, me, I'm not agriculture. I'm not anti-animal agriculture at all.
Yeah,
Very, very strong proponent of animal agriculture. Very much a carnivore. I like eating animals, but I often question the system in which we are doing that now. And the way we raise our animals is not conducive to the health of our population or to the health of our planet. So
I
you think about this,
I agree with
you
you
know,
completely. Like, I'm just
so
sitting here eating it up, Dale, just keep going.
October 1st, let's say we have a cornfield in Iowa and we have a, a a pasture in Iowa across the 5-wire barbed wire fence. on October 1st, $50,000 pickup pulling a $30,000 trailer pulls into that pasture. They load up the calves. They're hauled to a, multi-million-dollar sale barn that takes 4% of the proceeds from that calf.
Plus a buck ahead for the checkoff.
Yep.
Can't forget those guys.
Yeah, you gotta feed the checkoff. And then those calves are put onto a $250,000 semi burning, $4 diesel that takes those calves to a feedlot in the Texas Panhandle. And then the next day, an $800,000 combine pulls into that cornfield, starts picking it, puts it onto a $50,000 grain cart pulled by a $150,000 tractor. It moves it to the edge of the field. It's put onto another $250,000 semi, and it hauls it to a multi-million-dollar elevator that burns propane to get that grain moisture down to where it'll store. And then it transfers it onto a multi-million-dollar rail car that moves it to Garden City, and where it produces beef and produces mounds of manure, or Texas Panhandle, I guess.
Oh, come
Somewhere
on.
in
We can do better. Like, it goes to the same feedlot to feed the cows that were right next door.
Yeah. It goes to the same feedlot to feed the same calves, and they produce mounds of manure that they can't afford to spread because they have super saturated everything within economic hauling distance of the feedlot with salt and excess phosphorus. They've salted the ground to where it won't hardly grow anything, even though it's, 20% organic matter from all the manure, and grows nothing but kochia. And then back at the farm, the corn farmer takes his corn check, and 1/3 of it goes to replace the fertilizer that he trucked off in that corn. You know why we do that, Brian? Why we have this system? Because we're efficient.
I was going to say because I shouldn't say that. And maybe you can unpack it. Like, question I've had for a long time is the quote corn subsidies.
Mm-hmm.
Corn and soybean subsidies. How's that money actually flow? Who gets it? Like, who ends up with 95 cents of the dollar of those of corn subsidy?
I will tell you in reality, and I think this is where you're going. It stays in the farmer's hands for just a fraction of a second, and it goes to pay, the machinery payment. It goes to pay for fuel. It goes to pay for fertilizer. If there's anything left over, well, you can't send any to Uncle Sam, so I got to go buy machinery to eliminate my tax burden. And I want to have that, I got to get rid of my tax burden. So I need to buy depreciating assets that lose 10% of their value the day it leaves the lot, if not 20. That's why farmers are broke. Because, and subsidies, and I mean, you're kind of a libertarian lean. Kind of. Anytime the government pours money into something, there is an entire industry that builds up around that, designed to extract that money. And sometimes it's intentional, sometimes it's unintentional. When, remember the Trump bump on soybeans? Last year, Trump's presidency, and we were in the trade war with China, and said, well, this trade war cost all you guys $1 a bushel on soybeans or whatever it was. And all these farmers got big checks in the fall of the year or whenever it happened. I'll tell you what several farmers told me once that was on the news, all their landlords raised their rent.
Funny how that works.
You get a phone call, California number. Oh, who's this? Oh, hey, I saw on the news where you guys got a bunch of money. I think it's time that I raise the rent. And, all these absentee landlords, the money not only did it not stay in the farmer's hand, it didn't stay in the area. It all left.
Yep. It goes to the seed companies, the machinery dealers, fertilizer dealers,
industries, whoever is manufacturing inputs, that's where it goes. And it does not stay in the community. We have developed, United States people argue about American exceptionalism. Is there such a thing as American exceptionalism? I say I like to think that when, at the time this country was founded, we take so many things for granted in this country that much of the world has never seen. And even, just freedom was a big, big deal in 1776 because most of the world was in some form of feudalism and monarchies. And the fact that people could have the people dictated the government was such a radical idea back then. And wow, what a concept that the individual farming the land could be a landowner and that they could vote and control the government. And the people actually control the government was such a radical, novel concept, 250 years ago. And we absolutely take that for granted now. And we take it for granted to the degree that we have allowed ourselves to slip back into a new form of feudalism. Part of it is because of those subsidy payments, I would argue.
Do you think that it was maybe a vision of some of the original framers of the Constitution that we were to be a nation of gentlemen farmers?
Absolutely. And in fact, I think Thomas Jefferson used, what was the terminology he used? But yes, that we would have independent landowning farmers who would basically, my recollection of this part of history is weak enough that I don't know this for certain, but I believe there was a strong argument that only landowners could vote, with the idea that we would all be landowners. We would be a nation of independent landowning farmers. And that was defeated, but the taxes would be paid by, there was no income tax. There would be a property tax. And so the same people, you paid taxes on land, and owning land gave you the right to vote because you were paying the taxes. So that was your
sounds like a great deal if you're, from a family that's owned land. Like, yeah, I could see how that would work. Sign me up. That's cool.
We have the power. Obviously, that's not what happened, but there was a segment of the original framers of the Constitution that wanted that happen. Of course, the idea that everybody could vote, what a stupid idea. Commoners, common people, why should they be allowed to vote?
I mean,
what a crazy idea that was at the time. And now we assume, we take that for granted that we all have a right to vote once we turn 18.
Yeah. But, I just want to point out, just for clarity's sake, that when they signed the document 200 and almost 50 years ago now, people of color were not included and women were not included
Mhm.
in that. So
Correct.
it wasn't just wealthy landowners, it was men,
Mhm. Yeah.
which, we don't need to talk about, that had its whole other sorts of problems.
And 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 to clarify, it wasn't about skin color, but it was about slavery because there were black free men that were allowed to vote,
Yes.
at least in the northern states.
And there
But
were white Irish
slaves,
slaves in the North that were not.
yes, and it it boggles me that the history of Ireland is completely unknown to most people. Basically 800 years of slavery in Ireland that is completely ignored in history books. Uh,
Well, that makes sense that we don't know a whole lot about it because we kind of have a primarily Anglo-Saxon society, which originated in Great Britain, who were
mhm.
oppressors of the Irish and wrote all of the history books that we kind of refer to. So that's not really a shock to me.
Yeah. And like they say, history is written by the victors.
That's why everybody
And
wants to win, so you can hide the truth.
yeah, quite true, quite true. And so, and we were discussing, you talk about warfare. Uh, you know, we were kind of talking off camera before about, going back to the book of Genesis.
Oh, yeah.
And
I'd love to listen to
how,
you talk about this.
okay, so how all this started. I I have a theory that, I mean, when you look at the paintings, the medieval paintings of the original sin, it has, you know, Eve handing Adam this apple while this serpent, you know, with a devil's head, you know, so looks gleefully and it's like, oh, she's handing him the apple. That's the forbidden fruit. I have an entirely different view of the book of Genesis than that painting. And I used to work with a Hindu, and he was the most fascinating man because he's one of the few people that at the age I was 22, I guess, at the time. It was the first non-Christian that I really had in-depth conversations with, all day long, 8-hour long conversations. And he had such a different perspective than what I'd been raised with. But one thing he said, your Bible is the most accurate history book ever written. He said, that's what it is. It's a history book. It's a log
Was
of
he
Middle
referring to
Eastern.
was he referring to the King James version or the original Hebrew version?
He did not specify, but that's another
It
topic of conversation
it's
here
like just
that we need to keep hang on to that idea. I know where
'cause
you're going here.
in the original 10 commandments, in the original Hebrew, it says, "Thou shalt not murder." It's not, "Thou shalt not kill," it's, "Thou shalt not murder."
Mhm.
But it often gets mistranslated from "Thou shalt not murder" to "Thou shalt not kill," because when you're translating from Hebrew to English, it's difficult to exactly get concepts and words and definitions to line up.
Absolutely. And there's another example in the book of Genesis that we can hit on later here. But I believe the original sin was the culture of grain crops with tillage. So, you know, Eve handed Adam, the original sin was Eve giving Adam the forbidden fruit of knowledge. So, what was this fruit? why was it called the fruit of knowledge, and why was it forbidden? So
Are you
wheat,
saying that the apple is symbolic?
yeah, and inaccurate. And the Quran has a similar story, but in it's depicted as wheat.
Okay.
It actually says wheat. And so why would wheat be called the fruit of knowledge? Well, first of all, it's a man-made plant. It contains genes from 4 wild grasses. It is a human-created plant. Wouldn't fruit of knowledge be kind of an accurate description for a man-made plant several thousand years ago?
Seems like it.
And why was it forbidden? Why did God say, don't grow this stuff? Don't eat this stuff? Well, you look at the legacy. The Garden of Eden is described in the Bible as sort of like a food producing paradise. And then after a while, Adam and Eve and their descendants are cast out of the Garden of Eden. And biblical scholars think the Garden of Eden was located in near the area of Abu Huraira. And I'm probably completely butchering that pronunciation, but that's how I would pronounce it with my, as I see it written. And wheat archaeologists also find the same place to be where the growing of wheat began.
Okay.
A big finger, God didn't cast them out of the Garden of Eden with a big finger coming out of a cloud saying, get out, in a loud booming voice. They ruined their soil. They turned it into a desert because they grew wheat on this sloping, arid land, and it washed away. And
Okay,
they couldn't grow anything, so they had to leave.
I'm
Now,
not arguing with you. I'm just wondering, like, what do you have to support that?
oh gosh, you want me to send you some, some uh, I mean, there's archaeological evidence that, there's pollen records that this was olives, figs, pomegranates, all kinds of, arid, tolerant, but perennial food producing vegetation.
Okay.
And then it shifted all of a sudden to wheat, and then it became a desert. Archaeologists have documented that. I mean, the Fertile Crescent at one time was fertile and produced an amazing amount of food with very little impact of humans. And then wheat became the predominant. Skeletal size shrunk anywhere from 6 inches to a foot, and age at death of the skeletons they've discovered, the average age went from 80 years to 40 years. For when they went to largely a hunter-gatherer to early agricultural. And it was not good for people. Now, it did provide a whole bunch of empty calories, which allowed the population to expand. And then once the population expanded and then they ruined their land, the whole middle part of the Bible
Is about moving.
essentially about people moving and warfare, because you ruin your land and then you keep going. And the story of Cain and Abel.
Yes.
Was that about two brothers? So was that actually about two brothers, or is that about two types of people? Regardless, the story is God didn't accept the sacrifice from the grain farmer. He accepted the sacrifice of the pastoralist. Abel, was the herder of livestock, and Cain was the grain farmer, and Cain slew Abel. And what do you think happened to Abel's land?
He put sheep on it. Or he put the He got rid of the sheep and he put wheat on it.
Right, right. And that essentially has been human history. We were talking about the Irish. Why did the British just have this inborn hatred of Irish and, you know, said, well, these are inferior people? Said, no, the Irish had rich land. The British had, the Romans suppressed the British, the indigenous, inhabitants of the British Isles. They cut down all their trees, in 1,000 years, their Roman invasion, and then started plowing ground, growing wheat, growing in their soil, and then the population expands and the productivity goes down. And well, gosh, we're out of good soil, but there's all this island next to us that bunch of dumb hillbillies, uh,
All those weird red-haired people.
all these weird red-haired people, that they're sitting on rich soil and, they're really inferior to us. They look kind of like us, but they're inferior to us. They're subhumans. So they're not cultured like we are. So we have a moral right to take their land, enslave them, and send all that food. The Irish potato famine, there was plenty of food produced in Ireland during the Irish potato famine, but because they were essentially slaves, they had to send their food to Britain.
And they grew so many potatoes because it's like potatoes weren't taxed, or maybe the potatoes weren't subject to confiscation or something.
There was something along those lines. That there was a reason that potatoes became the predominant crop. One is, just yield per acre of calories, because the amount of land that they were allowed to use for themselves was pretty small. But, and then you say, oh, well, those evil British and those, poor noble Irishmen struggling under oppression, and then the Irish leave during the potato famine, come to the United States, and what do they do when they get here? Well, we want land. Where's their land? Well, go west, kill Indians, take their land, grow your potatoes there. And so, the oppressed become the oppressor, and they take other people. We have this expansion of grain-based agriculture that causes land ruination. And once you ruin your own land, you take someone else's. And if they object, you kill them. That is human history, unfortunately. And so why do I consider the culture of wheat to be the original sin? Why did God say, don't eat this stuff? It's not that there's anything inherent, there is no morality whatsoever in wheat kernel. But the culture of wheat, using tillage, the displacement of that perennial vegetation that once supported us with a very high degree of nutrition, whether it was, fruits and nuts, berries, but also the animals that ate the grassland in between all these food producing shrubs, contributed. That is incredibly nutritious, incredibly diverse, full of all kinds of, not just protein, vitamins, and minerals, but, anthocyanins and all these secondary compounds in plants that nourish us. And animals that were eating not corn and taking all those omega-6 fatty acids and depositing it into their fat, but high omega-3 containing, grassland nourished, diverse vegetation, omega-3 containing fat in those animals. The animals were more nutritious, and the plants they ate, the plant food they ate, was more nutritious than wheat. And that all got displaced. So when I say I believe the original sin was cultured wheat. And then you talked about the King James version of the Bible. And I am in a motel room, so there might be a Bible that I can go look up and find this passage. But I had one person who makes a living selling tillage equipment says, hey, it's in the Bible. It says, till the soil. We are commanded to till the soil. And I'm like, that doesn't sound right. And in the King James Version, it does indeed say till the soil. So after getting into a Facebook argument with this guy, I go and I consult some Hebrew scholars. I take my Facebook arguments seriously, or I used to.
Well, yeah, I mean, you should.
Because this is, a big deal in my life. The elimination of tillage. If I could accomplish that in my life, I will have done a tremendous service for this planet. Not that I'll ever, but every single acre I take out of tillage, I think is a bonus for the planet and its population. And so this bothered me. So to the point where I went and consulted some Hebrew scholars, and I said, what does this passage in Genesis actually say in Hebrew? And they came back to me and they said, it says, thou shalt take care of the soil. It does not say till the soil.
That's interesting.
It says, thou shalt steward the soil.
Kind of like the difference between kill and murder.
Oh, bigger, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah. But it kind of the same flavor. Like,
yeah.
The concept's there, but you
it translated. Of course, tillage had become endemic by King James time. That was, tilling ground was considered a noble pursuit because you turn this worthless pasture ground or this low producing pasture ground into abundant grain, at least for a few years until you ruin it. And so tillage was considered a noble thing to do. Your manifest destiny, let's go to plow the plains, raise grain. And so in King James time, taking care of the soil, probably whoever was working for King James, who did that translation, probably saw absolutely nothing wrong. Take care of the soil, till the soil. Probably made sense at the time. But there are people who use that biblical justification for land ruination. And, the net result of tilling soil is land ruination. And you say, well, you can do it without ruining the land. Well, you can, but that has not been the case throughout history.
Yes, you can do it without ruining the soil, but you're not.
Yeah. That hasn't been the observation.
So I wonder if the last inhabitants of the Fertile Crescent, as they were packing their shit to leave, I wonder if they blamed climate change.
Good question. Very good question. I am guessing they did. Quite honestly. Because it's always much easier. And the climate may have changed, to be honest. But why did it change?
Yeah. How much of that did they cause?
Yes. And it is much easier to blame an outside entity for your misery rather than your own actions.
Well, of course. I'm perfect. I never did anything wrong. I did everything right. Did everything I was supposed to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And, so yeah, I do think the culture of now, I'm not saying that there's any such thing as an evil plant, although, I could argue,
Ceresia, Lespedesia, Eastern red cedar.
oh, those are great goat feed.
Okay.
I used to feel that way about those plants, but you see what goats can do with those. It's like, man, the only green thing on this ranch in the wintertime is cedar trees, and goats love it. So why am I spending all this effort to kill the stuff? And goats love ceresia in the summer, and it's the only legume that really survives in the Flint Hills.
If you're breeding
So,
goats that'll eat cedar trees and ceresia, brother, you're in the wrong line of business right now. Like you're pushing the wrong thing.
yep. And if I'm getting there. I'm getting there. Just got to get the fence in place. But I am actually coordinating with, maybe you're familiar with Greg Christensen.
Name rings some bells. Yeah.
Greg is a practical goat guy. And that's almost an oxymoron,
I wasn't going to say that.
because most people who raise goats do so as a backyard hobby. They may have an intention of making money, but these goats are essentially, fed imported hay because they have more than what their land area can support. And like horses, are how they are typically raised. So they're essentially dry lotted, heavily parasite infected, and all the supplies are bought at the local farm supply store, and really, really expensive. They have a massive amount of infrastructure, purchase a massive amount of feed, get virtually no use out of their land area to feed those goats. Greg and I just had a conversation with him a couple of days ago. We're trying to plan a joint grazing school. Greg is very, very practical about goats. It's like, how do you keep goats in cheap, without basically the kind of fence you see surrounding prisons, topped with razor wire and,
Double layered,
50,000 volts.
yeah.
Yeah. 50 color machine gun turrets, how do you keep goats in? And Greg is the most practical, economical goat raiser that I know. It's how can I do things cheaper and more economically? This is the intention of being a profit generating enterprise, not a hobby.
Right.
And so that's why I'm really excited to do this joint project, Greg. He has wonderful mind for economy, and that's a kind way of saying he's tight. But if you're not tight in the livestock business, that's a very, very good trait to have in the livestock business.
It's a good way to go out of business if you don't know how to not spend money. I mean, in the livestock business, the only thing you can control is how much money you spend. Everything else is pretty much roll the dice or out of your control.
Yeah. And Dave Ramsey has a saying along the lines of, you can never out earn stupid spending, or something along those lines. It's really easy to stupidly spend more than you can make, no matter how much you make. It's your spending decisions that kind of govern profitability. And that's absolutely true in the livestock industry. So, the cedar trees, the Ceresia, I have a friend who ranches in the southern Flint Hills. I had a horrible cedar problem, horrible Ceresia problem, and his son was wanting to come back to the ranch. And he said, well, there's no room. We're not making money. I said, if you want to come back, you have to figure out your own way of making money. And his way of making money was goats, because, we have cedar, we have Ceresia. Let's turn our problems into profits. And they cleaned both of them up. In fact, maybe a little too well, because now that the goats, I've seen research that 40% of the diet of goats can be cedar trees.
Really?
They have the ability to, the problem in cedars is that the oil in the, just basically plugs the rumen up. And goats can metabolize a surprisingly high amount of that without causing problems. So about 40% of their diet can be cedar beans. And the rest of it needs to be fairly high protein, high value type forage. But
so their rumen has the energy, has the right balance in it to metabolize the seed.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that oil is obviously very high in energy content, as oils, lipids are, but protein isn't there to balance it. And there's no fiber content there. And I don't truly understand the inner workings of the digestion of the cedar, the oils in cedar, but I do know that goats are much better able to handle them than any other livestock. And the tannins, which make Ceresia lespedeza highly unpalatable. Now, like annual lespedeza, which is very palatable, Korean lespedeza, or Marion or Legend lespedeza, the annual types of lespedeza are very palatable, and their tannin content runs 1 to 2%, which is enough to make them non-bloating, but not so high as to make them unpalatable. Ceresia lespedeza usually runs 10 to 11% tannin, which is very high, makes it very bitter, and very, very unpalatable to cattle. Sheep will nibble on it, but goats actually like the stuff. Most tree leaves are fairly high in tannin, and goats, of course, are natural browsers. So they have evolved to metabolize high levels of tannin in their diet. And so Ceresia really doesn't bother them at all. It's actually one of their preferred forages. And if you can turn Ceresia into little fertilizer pellets all over your property using goats that stimulate your grass, Ceresia is a highly effective legume that will grow in really inhospitable soil. Like most of our native grass is in really inhospitable soil. And that's what spared it from the plow, 150 years ago. So goats, maybe cedar and Ceresia aren't ranching or aren't cattle problems. They're goat opportunities. Maybe we need to add more. I'd love to see goats on the menu at McDonald's. Just like, the creeping green menace we talked about with cedar. Yeah, cedar can absolutely destroy in the absence of any management to knock it back. But the guy I went to, he pointed out a cedar tree. I've got a picture of it. It looks like a lollipop. Typically a cedar tree looks like a cone.
Right.
And there's dead grass all the way underneath that cone because sunlight doesn't reach it. And his cedar trees looked like lollipops. There was a stem, and then the tree part bushed out about 6 foot high because that's as far as the goats could reach. And grass grew right to the base of the cedar tree. And this is a different looking deal. I said, are you going to go around and cut those down with chainsaws? He said, no, if I did that, I'd have to start feeding the goats in the wintertime. And like,
Okay.
that's a pretty unique viewpoint. If you can turn your problems into profit, what a deal. And of course, at some point, we like beef. We eat a lot of beef. I mean, you go into a restaurant, you can order beef. You go to fast food place, you order beef. You go into, quick shop, you can get beef jerky and beef sticks. You don't see that with goat products. Agronomically, ecologically, goats could be a very, we have brush problems. Well, get out the plane, fly on toward on. Then, okay, we just got rid of our brush, but we also got rid of all of our legumes. So now we lack nitrogen. So let's go spray fertilizer. Fertilizer stimulates the grass, but
we'll put a
you
bunch
gotta
of
do it
synthetic nitrogen on there and we'll kill all the soil microbiology.
And you create grass monocultures that are very high in nitrogen content. And then you get army worms. Now you got to spray for army worms every month. And it's like, why did we go down this road in the first place? Well, we don't have the right blend of livestock. And I think a real key will be diversify. And I'm a cattle rancher. I'm very pro beef, but I think we need to add, we need to be eating goats to stimulate demand for goats.
And that in turn will stimulate land regeneration.
Absolutely.
I like it. it.
So here's an interesting story. I know you address, animal activism and, anti-meat, vegan type activists. And so one of the arguments for against animal agriculture, so you have all this land area and you only produce so many pounds of beef per acre. So it's really inefficient. And of course, my argument is that, so is that land destroyed to make that beef? You can produce beef from an intact, natural, native ecosystem.
Yeah, we don't need to destroy it and plant a bunch of corn, soybeans, and alfalfa to grow cows in a feedlot.
Yeah. So that land is not destroyed. It is used in its intact native form or restored to a facsimile of its native form. A restored prairie is what I did with the first farm that I bought is I put it back to a kind of restored prairie type system, but had it set up for year-round grazing and so forth. But just to illustrate that beef is not the only product of that type system. Had a friend send me an article from Osage City newspaper.
Okay.
He read it off to me, actually. I never saw it. But it was the 150 years ago today section.
Okay.
And it said that in this year, it would have been right after the Civil. In this year, the railroad station in Osage City shipped to New York on ice-packed rail cars, forget how many million pounds of bobwhite quail that were wild harvested after all the work was done by farmers in their spare time with muzzle loading shotguns. And it was enough. We did the math at the time, and it ended up being 2 pounds of quail per day for every, assuming the population of Osage County was the same as what it was then. That amount of quail would feed every current resident of Osage County 2 pounds of quail every day, every year.
Wonder what the quail population's like around Osage County, Oklahoma these days. Really wonder about that. You know, those big harvests and roundups, I can remember just anecdotally hearing some about like jackrabbit roundup where they'd go, go hunt all the jackrabbits and round up the jackrabbits.
My grandfather participated in those.
And we wonder why we don't have any of those animals anymore. We wonder where they've all gone.
Yeah, we have simplified our landscape. We have eliminated insects, and I have personally sprayed insecticide to save a crop before, but it really pained me because when you have that massive interjection of toxin, and you kill spiders, and when you kill insects, you eliminate all the things that eat those insects, like birds. So, I told you about, putting nitrogen fertilizer on grass, and then it causes weeds to grow. And then you spray Tordon, which gets rid of the weeds, but also gets rid of your legumes. So now you're locked into applying fertilizer, which creates more weeds, which you have to kill. You get this, and then you create this grass monoculture. And the only insects you have out there are armyworms, and they can take out your grass stand essentially, literally overnight. So you got to spray for your armyworms, save your crop, and you eliminate all these insects with multiple insecticide applications per year. I've been to locations where they do that. That's their routine pasture management, like in Northwest Arkansas. And I went there and I spoke about Bermuda grass management to a group, and going through the expenses, of nitrogen fertilizer. And they said, oh, and they started talking about this armyworm thing. And I'd never heard of this before, shame to say. So I really had no ready answers for it. And it bothers me when I'm in front of a group and I don't have ready answers for their problems. It really, really bugs me. So I'm all the way home, I'm stewing over this. Oh, I should have thought to say this. I should just completely caught me off guard. And so we're driving home, and Brett Peshek was there with me, and we'd been on the road for an hour or two. And I said, Brett, have you seen any birds? He goes, what? And I haven't been paying attention. I said, just stay quiet and tell me the first time you see a bird. You can't count pigeons in town. The first bird we saw was probably 15, 20 minutes down the road, and it was a vulture eating a roadkill.
Okay.
We saw no meadowlarks, quail, no blackbirds, not even starlings. We saw no wild birds outside of city limits. And within city limits, there were, sparrows, starlings, and pigeons. But once we got outside of any city limits, no birds. We had, and think, well, why no birds? Well, 4 applications of insecticide broadcast over all these acres.
Kills all the insects, which, newsflash, birds eat bugs.
Birds eat bugs. And in my view, they took the entire raw, now, spray insecticide to save a crop, but figure out, why did you need to spray that insecticide? Why are there armyworms there? And
Armyworms are a symptom, not a cause.
Yeah. Yeah. So it comes back to having a grass monoculture. Armyworms eat grasses. And when you have no legumes out there, and they're one of the few insects that eat primarily, that can live on Bermuda grass. Very, very few other insects can survive on Bermuda grass. It's really high in fiber and really low in actual true digestible protein. And so it's just not a good source of food for insects, other than armyworms. And once you get rid of all the legumes and other broadleaf plants, which are good food sources for a lot of different kinds of insects, once you get rid of those, you don't have all these harmless, wide variety of insects that can nourish a bird population over a long period of growing season. And because you don't have those insects, you don't have birds that can control bad insects. And so therefore you have to go round up the sprayer every, but as long as you continue that spray routine, you'll always have to spray.
And I think people are locked into it because it takes a lot of time to recover from that. Like it takes time for that toxicity level to fall and for those species to move back in. And it's like people have gone down this road of chemical use. I mean, whether we're talking about like kind of in your example, or we're talking about the Kansas corn farmer, like you've gone so far down this road of chemical use. There's such a buildup. You've got to have such a high level of inputs to maintain that system. It's like, I can't afford to not do this because I can't take the loss on these acres. Like I can't afford the loss of productivity. I've got to have that cash flow from these acres. I've got to continue these practices. I can't make, less or nothing on these acres for 3 years while it's in transition in order for the health to come back up. So then they'll go to the NRCS office with their freaking hand out and say, I need a subsidy or a grant to help me get back through this tough time because all the subsidies and grants that I've been taking for the practices that you've been encouraging. It's like, and I get this is a problem. This is a psychological problem. Okay. Like we talked about before, when you incentivize a practice, regardless of even if it's incentivized because the outcome is what's needed at the time, but then you continue subsidizing that practice in order to get the effect or in order to get the result. But then the negative effects start showing up in the system 3, 5, 10 years down the line. It's really difficult to roll that subsidy back or to change that policy. Because it's like, once the government
become addicted to the subsidy,
once they start handing out money, like what happens when the government stops handing out money? People get really, really mad really, really quick. And we're almost to the point where nearly everybody in our society is getting some sort of government check. I'm going to say this, and if I get hate mail for it, I don't care. If you're taking crop insurance, crop subsidies, if you're a commodity farmer, you're probably a lot more of a socialist than you will ever want to admit. commodity farming in America is just it's almost socialism with the way the crop insurance and all the price supports work. And it
So, Brian, and go ahead. You're on a roll. I hate to stop you.
and I wish I could have remembered or taken some notes, but there's another podcast. It's father and son out of Iowa. They have hogs and they have corn. So that's kind of their paradigm. Like, I'm not even going to mention the name of it. But they had a guest on that was talking about like his corn farm. And he's like, yeah, with all the subsidies and the crop insurance, all we got to do is just do everything right. And we're pretty much guaranteed $50 to $75 profit per acre per year. Well, why am I doing anything else? If I can get into government programs that's prescriptive, that's going to guarantee me $50 to $75 a year, that's why everybody grows number 2 dent corn. It's because they're basically guaranteed to stay in business because of the crop insurance and commodity support system, which I'm not saying we don't need. And I'm not saying I know what it should look like, but the system we have definitely doesn't work. It doesn't work for consumers. It doesn't work for taxpayers, and it doesn't work for producers. It works for corporations.
Yeah. And like we said, the sad thing is that those subsidies don't stay in the hands of farmers very long, because the government pours money into farmers, and then input suppliers know that that farmers are able to pay more for their input. And so, the rising tide of the farmers lifts the boat of that's probably complete wrong analogy, but I think you know where I'm going with this.
No, I get it. When the farmers say rising tide lifts all boats, that's what they mean. It's not that the rising tide lifts their boats; it lifts all the people that they pay. I guess when I try to say it, what I'm trying to mean is, hey, the better we all get at land management, the better everything's going to be for everybody.
Absolutely. Regardless of government policy, there are things we can do with land management that can completely fix a good number of our problems. About crop insurance, the most egregious part of this, like going through part of the Southwest, and there's all this expiring CRP. And it was put into CRP because they could not profitably raise grain crops there. So, let's not just let it blow. Let's plant CRP. Not a bad idea. But the problem with CRP, and there's many problems with CRP, depopulation, because the land is taken out of production for one thing. But restoring it to grassland, I think good idea. So when the CRP expires, you would think, okay, they're going to turn into pasture, because it's already proven that it can't profitably raise grain crops. That's why it's in CRP. But no, they plow the CRP up, moldboard plow that CRP up, because it generates it's now owned by an absentee landowner who hasn't seen the place since they put it in CRP and moved away. And maybe it's owned by their kids now. They can get $10 an acre for pasture rent, or some guy can come along with a plow it up. And I've never carried crop insurance, so I don't know how the rules work. But the story I'm told is that they can essentially get county average for 5 years growing corn. And during those 5 years, they are basically guaranteed, and they want the corn to die. That's why they moldboard plow it. They don't no-till it, because then they might have to harvest it.
Right.
They want it zeroed out, so they can get a check without having to harvest it. And you are essentially guaranteed about $200 an acre least the area that I was at, you're guaranteed $200 an acre for planting corn that you fully expect to die.
Sounds about
And
right.
They call it death farming. That is taxpayer subsidized ecological destruction. It's just wrong. But if I'm a landowner and I can get $200 an acre rent versus $10 an acre rent,
It's not a hard decision.
no. I mean, now the farmer's guaranteed $200, and I don't know what he pays for land rent.
Well, if he's
Some
guaranteed
of
that
but-
much, the rent's got to go up. I mean, the
Right.
rent's going to be more than $15 an acre, what it would be for just grass.
Yes. And so if the landowner is, not involved, doesn't see it, they don't care. Yay, yeah, I'll take, $60 an acre or $40 an acre or whatever the going rate for cropland rent is. I understand. I understand why they do that. But I'm more upset about a system that makes it financially attractive to do so.
And I think we're gonna have to leave some solutions for another time, because we are just about out of time. I do want to say though, I do have this stupid camera. I have one of your books here. I actually have my copy of Managing Pasture right here.
Oh, cool.
So
You're the
and
guy that bought that.
yeah, like how many of these have you sold? 4, 5?
Yeah, it's something like that.
So I can't really show this because of like mine's actually autographed by Dale himself. I actually had Dale sign my book at one of the events we were at. This just says stolen from the library of Brian Alexander because people steal my books. Yeah, so you are an author. How many books you got now?
3.
3. Managing Pasture, what are the other 2?
The Drought Resilient Farm, which is practical tips to, make your farm drought resilient. And so you suffer less from low rainfall. I really don't get into the causes of rainfall in there like we did earlier in this, but my third book, Restoring Your Soil, I do get into the causes of rainfall a little bit in there, but I think I have another book in me, and that would be more of a global scale, kind of some of the things we talked about today. How do we change agriculture on a global scale to make our planet and our population healthier and happier?
I'm looking forward to that one.
So, yeah, and that will probably be a joint effort with my wife, Dr. Elizabeth Island, because it's great to have a like-minded partner.
Yes.
Who brings with similar goals, but a completely different skill set than mine. I look at land and she looks at how land affects people and has been affecting people.
So for guys
and how people affect land.
So for the folks just listening, Dale and I think 15, almost 20 minutes that we spoke before we managed to hit the recording button. And one of the things that we were talking about is the current state of mental health among farmers and ranchers. I think the comment I made was that it's representational of the generational trauma, the mistreatment of the soil. And
yes,
like I said, we'll future episodes and whatnot. So if anybody wants to buy one of your books, check them out, get in touch with you to heckle, harass, or tell you how you're wrong. How do we get a hold of it?
I have a website, regenerativewisdom.com. I I do speaking. I do private on-farm consultations. I do sell books, a few. But my main income is private consultations. I go to farms and ranches, and I tell people that I have yet to set foot on a farm or ranch where I can't, within a couple of hours, make some recommendations to roughly double stocking rates and almost eliminate hay feeding. And I've been from the Gulf Coast of Texas up to the Dakotas, and I've yet to not fulfill that statement.
I'd like to go on the road with you sometime.
I'll bring you along.
I think we'd have a legendary time. All right. Regenerativewisdom.com. Anywhere else you want people to go try to find you?
That's pretty much it. So that I'm trying to have a one-stop shop there. So
always the best. And guys, if you're ever at a conference where Dale is speaking, he likes his hecklers front and center.
Within throwing distance.
That's usually where you'll find me, is front and center, where, we're in throwing distance of each other. It's a good place to be.
Yep. So,
well, I appreciate your time, buddy. Great to see you.
Thank you for having me on. It's been fun.
Yes, it has. And we'll do this again. Got plenty more stuff to talk about. So
you bet.
Out there, we'll see you, and we'll see you on the next one.